I stood in the ballroom of the Meridian Grand Hotel, wearing the blue dress my husband, Leonard, had picked out for me 31 years ago, and I watched him laugh at something a woman young enough to be our daughter had just whispered in his ear. He didn't see me standing there. He never saw me anymore. Let me start from the beginning. Because this story doesn't make sense unless you understand what kind of woman I was before that night. My name is Harriet, not the kind of woman who makes scenes, not the kind who raises her voice in public, not the kind who lets you see her cry unless she's alone in the bathroom with the faucet running so nobody hears. I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, the youngest daughter of a Baptist deacon and a school teacher, and they raised me to be dignified. They raised me to hold my head up. They raised me to believe that a good woman keeps her house, keeps her family, keeps her composure. For 42 years, I kept all three. I married Leonard Whitmore when I was 23 years old, and he was 26. We were young and broke and completely in love, or at least I was. Leonard was charming in that particular way that certain men are charming, the kind of charm that feels like sunlight when it's pointed at you, and you never notice how cold it gets when it turns away. We built a life together in Memphis. I worked as a hospital administrator for 37 years. Leonard started as a junior associate at a regional firm and climbed, year by year, to become a senior partner at one of the most respected law firms in the state. We bought a house. We raised 2 children. We went to church on Sundays and had the Millers over for dinner on the last Friday of every month and took a vacation every August to the same stretch of coast in the Outer Banks because Leonard said routine was the foundation of a good life. I believed him. Lord, help me. I believed him about so many things. Our son Dwight, was the one who first said something to me. He called me on a Tuesday evening in February, and I remember it was February because I was looking at the magnolia tree in the front yard that still hadn't bloomed. And I was thinking about how it was late this year. And then my phone rang and it was Dwight, and he said, "Mama, I need to ask you something, and I need you to not get upset with me for asking." I told him to go ahead. He said, "Has Dad seemed different to you lately?" I didn't answer right away. I set down the cup of tea I was holding, and I looked at that magnolia tree for a long moment, and I thought about the right way to answer my son's question honestly without alarming him. Because the truth was, yes, Leonard had seemed different. He'd been different for about 8 months by then. He was distracted. He was protective of his phone in a way he'd never been before, setting it face down on the table, taking calls on the table, taking calls in the other room, smiling at the screen when he thought I wasn't looking. He had started wearing cologne on weekday mornings when he used to only wear it for special occasions. He had lost 17 pounds and bought 4 new dress shirts, and started going to the gym on Saturday mornings. I had told myself it was the promotion. Leonard had been made managing partner the previous spring, and I thought maybe he was reinventing himself, the way men sometimes do when they reach a new level of success. I told myself a lot of things that year. "He's been busy," I told Dwight. "The firm keeps him running." My son was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mama, I saw him last Thursday at Caruso's. He was with a woman. It wasn't a business dinner." Caruso's was the nicest Italian restaurant in Memphis. Leonard had taken me there for our 30th anniversary. I said, "What did she look like?" And Dwight described her. "Tall," he said, "younger. Dark hair pulled back. Beautiful in a careful, deliberate way. The way women are beautiful when they've worked very hard at it." She was laughing at everything Leonard said, and Leonard had his hand on top of hers on the table, and they were sitting on the same side of the booth. I thanked my son for telling me. I told him I would look into it. I told him not to say anything to his sister Brianna yet, and then I hung up the phone, and I sat down on the kitchen floor, not in a chair, on the floor, because my legs simply stopped working, and I put my face in my hands and I stayed there for a very long time. The woman's name was Yvette Carson. It took me 2 weeks, and the help of a private investigator named Roderick Payne to find that out. Roderick was a compact, quiet man with kind eyes who had been recommended to me by my friend, Odessa. Not the Odessa from my church, a different Odessa, my college roommate, who had gone through her own terrible divorce 12 years earlier, and who was the only person I told what was happening. Roderick found out everything within 10 days. Yvette Carson was 34 years old. She worked as a marketing consultant. She had been seeing my husband for 11 months. Leonard had rented her an apartment. He had not yet put her name on anything, but Roderick told me quietly, with that careful look men get when they're delivering information they know will break something. He told me that she had been to a real estate office with Leonard twice in the past month. She wasn't just a distraction, she was a plan. I sat with that knowledge for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of making Leonard's coffee in the morning and ironing his shirts on Sunday nights and asking him about his week and listening to him lie to my face with the ease of a man who has never once doubted his own impunity. 6 weeks of watching him come home late and smelling a perfume that wasn't mine when he leaned in to kiss my cheek. 6 weeks of being invisible in my own marriage. I want to be clear about something. I am not a woman who plans revenge. I am not a woman who thinks about destroying people. I am a 63-year-old grandmother from Savannah, Georgia, and the deepest desire of my heart has always been peace. But there comes a moment, and any woman who has been in this situation knows exactly the moment I'm talking about. There comes a moment when peace stops being possible, and the only question left is how you're going to carry yourself when the truth comes out. And the truth, I had decided, was going to come out on my terms. The occasion was Leonard's firm dinner. Every year in April, Whitmore and Associates hosted what they called the Spring Recognition Gala. A formal event at the Meridian Grand, 400 people in black tie, the kind of evening where Leonard turned into a different person. He was gracious and important and completely in his element, shaking hands with judges and city councilmen and senior partners from other firms, accepting compliments about the firm's recent victories. He lived for that night. He had told me once, years ago, that the Spring Gala was the one night of the year when he felt like he had actually become the man he always wanted to be. I had smiled at that. I had thought it was sweet. Now I understood that what he wanted to show off at the Spring Gala had changed. I found out from Roderick, 2 weeks before the event, that Leonard had arranged for Yvette Carson to attend as the guest of a younger partner named Sterling Hayes, who apparently owed Leonard a favor. She would be there as Sterling's +1, officially, but really she would be there for Leonard, to see him in his kingdom, to watch him be celebrated, to give him someone to look for across the room all night, someone who made him feel young and desired and new. I thought about that for a long, long time. Then I called Roderick and I told him what I needed, and I called my son Dwight, and I told him what I was going to do. Dwight was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Mama, you sure?" And I said, "Baby, I have never been more sure of anything in my life." And he said, "Then I'm going to be there." I also called my attorney, Gloria Sims, who was sharp as a tack and had handled divorces for half of Memphis's prominent families. I told Gloria what I knew and what I had documented, and Gloria said in that dry, precise way she had, "Harriet, you sit tight and you let me work. By the time this is over, Leonard Whitmore is going to wish he had stayed faithful." I bought a new dress, not blue this time, red. The evening of the Spring Gala, I got ready alone, in the bedroom I had shared with Leonard Whitmore for 31 years. I did my hair the way I used to do it when we were young, pinned up at the sides with the curls loose in the back. I put on my mother's pearl earrings. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror for a long time, and the woman looking back at me was 63 years old and tired, in a way that sleep couldn't fix. But she was also, and I say this not out of vanity, but out of something I can only describe as recognition, she was also still herself. After everything, she was still completely herself. Leonard came to the bedroom door in his tuxedo, and he looked at me and he said, "You look nice," in the flat, absent way he said most things to me by then, and I said, "Thank you, Leonard," and I picked up my evening bag and I followed him downstairs. Dwight met us at the hotel. He hugged me tightly when he saw me, and over his shoulder I caught the look in his eyes. Worried, determined, proud of me in advance of anything I'd done. He had brought his wife, my daughter-in-law Tamara, who knew what was happening, and who squeezed my hand when she greeted me and said very quietly, "We're right here, okay?" I nodded. I was steady. I was calm in the way that people are calm when they have already accepted the worst and are simply waiting for it to arrive. The ballroom was beautiful. It always was. Round tables draped in ivory linen, candlelight everywhere, the warm hum of 400 people dressed in their finest, the kind of room that makes ordinary people feel extraordinary. I had walked into this ballroom on Leonard's arm every April for 22 years. I knew every face, every cluster of conversation, every unspoken hierarchy of who stood near whom. I also knew the exact moment Yvette Carson walked in. She came in on Sterling Hayes' arm, wearing a gold dress that was precisely calibrated to turn heads. She was beautiful, just the way Dwight had described, tall and deliberate and aware of being watched. And across the room, without turning his head more than a fraction, Leonard found her. I watched it happen. I watched his face change, just barely, just enough. That small involuntary brightening that he used to have when he saw me. I excused myself from the conversation I was having with Judge Carolyn Brewster's wife, and I went to the bar, and I ordered a club soda, and I stood very still, and I breathed. An hour into the evening, they began the formal program. Awards, speeches, the firm's achievements over the past year laid out in careful, glowing detail. Leonard was introduced as managing partner, and he stood and smiled, and accepted the applause of 400 people who believed they knew him. And I sat at our table with Dwight on my left, and Tamara on my right, and I watched my husband perform the role of respected man. He was very good at it. The program included, as it always did, a short video presentation. The firm's highlights from the year, cases won, community initiatives, a few personal milestones of senior partners, retirements, anniversaries, that sort of thing. This year, the firm had asked families to submit photos and short video clips to be incorporated into the presentation. Leonard had mentioned it to me in passing 3 weeks ago. I had said I would look through some old photos. What Leonard didn't know was that 2 weeks ago, I had contacted the audiovisual firm handling the presentation, a small company run by a young man named Terrence Bell, who was professional and discreet, and who, when I explained what I needed and showed him what I had, said quietly, "Ma'am, I can do that." The video presentation began. It was lovely for the first 3 minutes. Partners and their families, vacation snapshots, grandchildren's birthday parties, retirement toasts. The room was warm and attentive, people murmuring and smiling at familiar faces on the screen. Leonard was relaxed beside me, his hand resting near mine on the table but not touching it. The way it had been for months now, close enough to look right, far enough to feel the distance. Then the screen showed a photograph of Leonard and me from our wedding day. We were 23 and 26. Standing outside the church in Savannah, and I was laughing at something he'd just said, and he had his arm around my waist, and we looked like people who believed everything was in front of them. I heard a few soft murmurs of recognition around the room, people who had known us for decades. Then the next image appeared. It was a photograph of Leonard and Yvette Carson. They were at a restaurant, not Caruso's, a different one, somewhere with exposed brick and dim lighting. Leonard's arm was around her shoulders. She was looking at the camera. He was looking at her. Roderick had taken it through the window on a Tuesday evening in March. The room went very quiet. Leonard's head turned toward the screen so slowly it was almost mechanical. I watched the color leave his face, not gradually. All at once, the way a light goes out. The next image, a printout of the lease for Yvette Carson's apartment. Leonard's signature at the bottom, clear and legible on a 6-foot screen. The next image, a text message exchange. I will not read you what it said. I will only tell you that it was unambiguous, and that several people in the room who were close enough to read it actually gasped. The final image. A photograph of Leonard and Yvette walking into a real estate office together. Dated 3 weeks ago. And then, because I had asked Terrence Bell to do this, because I had thought about it very carefully and decided that the truth deserved to be spoken out loud, text appeared at the bottom of the screen. White letters on a dark background. Simple and plain. 42 years. He forgot I was still in the room. The presentation stopped. The silence in that ballroom was unlike any silence I have ever heard. Not the silence of a room that has nothing to say. The silence of 400 people holding their breath at the same moment. I stood up. My legs were steady. My hands were steady. I was surprised by that, honestly. I had half expected to be shaking, but I was not shaking. I picked up my evening bag from the table, and I looked at my husband, who was still staring at the screen as if it might take the images back, and I said, calmly and clearly enough that the people at the surrounding tables could hear me, "I hope she was worth it, Leonard." Then I walked across the ballroom toward the exit. Behind me, I heard the sound of a chair scraping back. Dwight, standing up. I heard Tamara gathering her things. I heard the low, urgent roar of 400 people beginning to find their voices again. I did not hear my husband say anything. I pushed through the door, and I walked down the carpeted corridor of the Meridian Grand Hotel, and when I came out into the April air, it was cool and quiet, and smelled like rain coming. And I stood on the steps of that hotel, and I breathed. Dwight came through the door 30 seconds behind me. He put his arm around my shoulders, and he didn't say anything for a moment. My son is smart enough to know when words aren't the right thing. And then he said, "Mama, that was the most dignified thing I have ever seen." I laughed. I don't know where it came from, that laugh. It was real. It was genuine. It was the first real laugh I'd had in 8 months. I leaned against my son's shoulder, and I laughed until my eyes watered. And Tamara came out and put her arms around both of us, and we stood there on the steps of the Meridian Grand in the April night, and I felt, for the first time in a very long time, like I could breathe all the way down to the bottom of my lungs. Leonard called my cell phone 4 times in the next 20 minutes. I did not answer. What happened inside the ballroom after I left, I learned later from 3 separate people who had been there. Sterling Hayes apparently tried to quietly escort Yvette Carson out of the room, but not quietly enough. There was a brief, undignified scene near the exit. Several senior partners surrounded Leonard at the table, and from what I was told, the conversation was not kind. The managing partner of their Chicago affiliate, a woman named Gloria Park, who had known me personally for 15 years, was seen publicly embracing me at a charity luncheon 2 weeks later and making her feelings very clear. But here is what I want to tell you, because I think this is the part that matters most. I had spent 8 months being afraid of what would happen when the truth came out. I was afraid of the humiliation. I was afraid of becoming an object of pity. I was afraid of being 63 years old and starting over. I was afraid of all the things that women are afraid of when they've built their entire adult life alongside one person, and that person turns out to be something other than what they believed. What I had not understood, what I couldn't have understood until I walked out of those doors and stood in that April air, was how much of me had still been in that ballroom. How much of my energy, for 42 years, had been given over to Leonard Whitmore's comfort. Leonard Whitmore's image. Leonard Whitmore's idea of who I was supposed to be, and I didn't realize how much of a weight that was until I set it down. The divorce was final 14 months later. Gloria Sims was every bit as good as advertised. Leonard did not get to move Yvette Carson into the house we had shared for 31 years. Leonard did not get to quietly restructure the financial picture in ways that would have benefited him. Leonard got what the law said he was entitled to, and not $1 more, and he signed the papers in Gloria's office on a Tuesday morning in June. And I was not there to watch it, because I was in Savannah visiting my sister Pauline, sitting on her back porch watching her garden and drinking sweet tea, and feeling the particular peace of a woman who has stopped waiting for someone else to decide her worth. My daughter Brianna and I had some difficult months. She had been close to her father, and the truth of what he had done was hard for her to accept. I gave her time. I didn't push her toward a conclusion. She was 36 years old, and she had to work this out in her own way. By the following Christmas, she was sitting at my new kitchen table. I had moved into a smaller house, a house that was entirely mine, with a garden in the back and light in the mornings. She was sitting at my table, and she said, quietly, "Mama, I'm sorry it took me this long." And I told her there was nothing to be sorry for, and I meant it. Yvette Carson, as far as I know, is no longer with Leonard. I do not spend time thinking about either of them. That may surprise some people. Some people expect a woman in my position to carry bitterness like luggage, to rehearse the injustice on a loop. I understand that impulse. I felt it myself some mornings in the early days. But bitterness is a weight, and I had already spent too many years carrying things that weren't mine to carry. What I carry now is different. I carry the memory of walking out of that ballroom in a red dress with my head up. I carry the look on my son Dwight's face when he caught up with me on those steps. I carry the feeling of standing in the April air and knowing that everything that was going to happen next was entirely, completely mine to decide. I am 63 years old. I sleep through the night now. I tend my garden. I have coffee with Odessa on Thursday mornings, and I take long walks in the evening. And sometimes I sit on my back porch and watch the light change, and I think about what my father used to tell me when I was a little girl in Savannah. He used to say, "Baby, the truth doesn't need your help, it just needs time." He was right. It always eventually finds the screen.